Olivia Purvis is a speech pathologist with a passion for early language development and storytelling. Today I'm talking to Olivia about her first book for young children, Where's Moon? Olivia, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Hi, Greg. Thanks so much for having me today.
We're talking about your first book for young children, Where's Moon? How did the idea for Where's Moon come about?
My sister Amelia and I wanted to write our nephew a book. And it sounds simple in theory, right? But we had no idea just how much goes into writing a children's book. We started brainstorming, and the ideas were terrible. You wouldn't read them to your dog, let alone your child. But we watched videos, how to write a children's book workshop. We drew on our experience as aunties reading countless books to our nephew, and I drew on my experience around communication as a speech pathologist. One day I was outside with my nephew, Seb, and he asked, Auntie Liv, where's Moon? And there was the inspiration. And, the text sat in my notes for years until the stars finally aligned and we found an illustrator. We went through and self-published the book and then printed it locally here in Adelaide, which was really important for me. We did keep the book a secret. So we were so excited to give Seb the book, this huge labour of love for Christmas. He was he was sitting down, surrounded by our family. Everything went quiet. He tore the wrapping off, looked at the book and said, "What? Another book?" And he started playing with something else. So then we then shared it to our friends on social media in the guise of my partner and I making a pregnancy announcement. We've got exciting news. It's been a long time in the making. We made a book. And thankfully, this announcement was really warmly received and supported. And it was actually quite overwhelming, but in the best possible way.
Your book is written for Seb, but the main character is June. Who's June, if I can use that nice rhyming scheme, which appears quite a few times in the book?
June is the main character in the book. June's life was really based off of a day in the life of Seb. And it was quite funny because we'd hoped the book would be ready for him when he was 2, but it was published when he was 4. But it was fantastic because he then recognised that June's life was based off of his own. He'd say, "Oh, look, that's Poppy, and look, that's me riding on my bike, and that's Auntie Mills driving her van to me," which made it really special. So June really was inspired by Seb, and yeah, he was the inspiration.
What age range is this book intended for?
It was really written for basically 0 to 3-year-olds in mind. There's a lot of different language features in there. We speak a lot about phonological and phonemic awareness, vocabulary, print knowledge and background knowledge, language structure, and more, all these skills that provide the foundations for literacy development. And I gave these skills significant consideration when writing the text and wanted to help caregivers model these in a simple, engaging way. So, for example, I wrote the sounds into the story so that a sleep deprived caregiver didn't have to think of them late at night on the spot. Hey, Dad, what sound does a baboon make? Kids are starting to hear the sounds in our language. There's varied vocabulary, there's verbs, pronouns, adjectives, there's social language, there's concepts around time, size, and family. There's questions as well to engage and invite curiosity. Repetition, where's moon? But where's moon? Builds anticipation and routine within the text. There's a lot of simple phrases to support understanding and the illustrations that add meaning to the text. And it's easy to add gestures along the way. Mostly, it's meant to be quite relatable to a toddler's daily life.
And the storyline is a kind of journey too, a journey from question to answer.
That's correct. We do follow June in those questions that are asked throughout.
Does a story for young children need that kind of structure to maintain their interest? A kind of narrative journey, if you like?
Absolutely, it certainly does help to engage children, and it is something that really helps with their own language development too.
Your sister Amelia undertook the task of editing. What's involved in editing a children's book?
It was challenging. It was certainly a learning experience. It was a journey that I went on with my sister, Amelia. We did a lot of research. We spoke to a lot of different people, and we just basically learned through a lot of trial and error around how to navigate that space that, neither of us have ever worked in before. It was honestly a lot of fun. We've both worked in our professional fields for a long time, so it's been really fun and really interesting to take on a new challenge.
There's also, I suppose, a lot of distillation of ideas into words to find the language which so clearly expresses the ideas that they want to communicate.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess for her it was there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of revisions and going back to the drawing board, and there would be so many ideas that I would come up with and I'd throw her way. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? No, that's terrible. And I'd have to come up with something different. And as you said, the book it's only 26 pages long, but the amount of time and thought and revisions that go into those pages, it's phenomenal. But yeah, it's certainly evolved in the editing process as well as in the writing process as well.
Any friction between author and editor?
No, I think we would have a lot of back and forth, the occasional moment of indecision or disagreement. Yeah, so we'd have to try and find a common ground was most important.
Nye Parara illustrated the book for you, and very charming they are too. What's the thinking behind those illustrations and how do they relate to the text?
So with the illustrations, we wanted something that felt hand drawn, that was natural and authentic, and it was relatable for any child and caregiver reading the book. For example, there's June tipping the bowl of cereal on their head. I knew that my stick figure illustrations probably wouldn't quite cut it, so I reached out to a friend, and that was Nye. She's a graphic designer, and I asked if she'd be interested in illustrating a children's book. Thankfully, it turned out it had been a dream of hers to illustrate a children's book. So tucked my stick figures away and we began the journey of bringing the characters and the settings to life. Amelia and I, we gathered a range of photos of Seb, our family, his animals, his favorite toys, and they ended up being the inspiration for the illustrations. So in the story, there's a grandmother figure who's playing piano and who's playing music on the piano with June, which is representative of my mum, who plays and sings with Seb. There's a father figure reading a book to June before bed, which is representative of my brother-in-law. We did also want to include some additional elements in the book to help spark some conversation. So if you look closely, you'll find these along the way. It did take a little while to get the illustrations right. For example, my mum, she's a retired music teacher. She noticed that the music notes, the semiquavers, weren't accurately drawn. My eldest sister, Seb's mum, pointed out that depictions of June's bed didn't comply with Australian standards. Uh, and so we'd go back to the drawing board and we'd try again. But it was a lot of fun working with my friend Nye on the illustrations, not only because she's incredibly talented, but English is also her second language. So it led to some interesting conversations. I'd never had to explain what mooning someone meant before, but we got there in the end, and the illustrations are just gorgeous.
You are a speech pathologist by profession. What principles of speech pathology and language development have found their way into Where's Moon?
I could not help myself. It was really important for me to include, some of those foundation skills, phonological, phonemic awareness, really rich vocabulary, print knowledge, background knowledge, language structure, any of these skills that provide foundations for literacy development. Yeah, that was where we went into the rhyme and multisyllabic words to support phonological awareness, the really varied vocabulary, the concepts, the questions as well too. There's repetition, which builds anticipation, routine in the text. There's simple phrases to support the understanding and illustrations that add meaning to the text too. There's a focus on narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and ending. And it's pretty relatable to a toddler's life. You can even start a conversation after the book's finished. You see the moon outside your window. But yeah, a really good quality children's book, provides such a wonderful opportunity for children to learn about the world, to ignite their imagination and learn language and support interactions.
There's also a focus on the sound oon, as in June, and moon. Why did you focus on that particular sound?
I wanted, basically to make rhyme a key feature of the book, and so yeah, you'll see all throughout the story that there's a lot of words that will rhyme with moon, June. We've got spoon, all of those different elements. There's a lot of sound play as well in the book, some onomatopoeia, and they're the words for the sounds that they're referred to as well. And it was really important for me to include these too. These did go through a few revisions as well. So there is a scene where the main character, June, is riding a bike, and originally the text was you hoon, I hoon, beep beep. But my partner, who loves cars, he said, beep beep needed to sound faster. And so vroom vroom was born.
We all know how important reading aloud to young children is, but what can the reader bring to the experience? And sometimes it can be almost like a performance from the reader.
That shared book reading is so important. We get such wonderful opportunities to connect with children and to talk about things that maybe don't happen every day. And that role of the storyteller, there's so much that the storyteller, the reader, can contribute during book reading. For example, while we're reading stories, we want to follow a child's lead. They might skip pages, or we can see what they're interested in and focus on that. We can look at pictures and talk about what's happening. We might give children the opportunity to take a turn and pause between the words. We can expand on what they say too. And we might encourage participation with some occasional questions. There's also the content of the book. We might invite kids to make predictions and inferences during reading. There is so much that we can talk about in regards to the illustrations and make inferences about. There's a lot of added meaning that we might get, and they are, such a wonderful conversation starter too. There is so much that we can do during shared book reading.
Olivia, thanks so much for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
I've been talking to Olivia Purvis about her new book for young children, Where's Moon? It's self-published, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to Good Reading print and online magazine at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.